People who are in a real home invasion situation. What was it like, and what did you do? Dude came knocking on front door, and my mom and I ignored it. I was about 10, and my mom didn't want to answer the door to a stranger. He knocked a while, then went around the back and hopped the gate to try the back door. My mom got her gun and opened the back door with it visible, right before he tried to smash the glass. He took off running and was arrested on breaking and entering charges the next day after he broke into someone else's apartment and couldn't run. Story 2. My in-laws were home when a young guy broke into their house. They don't speak English very well, so my father-in-law, in the clearest English he could muster, loudly said, "Get me my gun." At that point, the intruder left in a hurry. Story 3. Tackled the guy. The hardest I've ever hit someone. And I'm a pretty big guy with a football background, but he didn't see me coming. It felt very much like a do-or-die moment, so I didn't hold anything back. Broke a few of his bones, messed up his face, and got him sentenced to 6 years. Story 4. I was at my friend's place when it happened to him. We were both teenagers then. The guy thought everyone was sleeping and he got startled when he saw us. He bit my friend. His arm required stitches from the bite, and he ran away. No idea who the guy was or what he wanted. Never happened again, and we never saw the guy. Story 5. I was in bed asleep at 7 a.m. when I heard a loud bang. I thought nothing of it because of the large cat tree I have downstairs that's always getting knocked over. So I rolled over and tried to go back to sleep. Not long after, my elderly cat comes running into my bedroom, jumps up on the bed, and tries to hide under the blankets. This immediately woke me up, because that old fat cat hadn't ran nor jumped on our bed for years. As I came to, I see 2 men coming up my stairs. At that point, it felt like time stopped, and somehow ran incredibly fast at the same time. I jumped out of bed and started screaming, "Get the hell out of my house!" And I remembered thinking while chasing these guys through my house and screaming again and again at the top of my lungs that my voice sounds exactly like my brother, and I wondered how strange that was. I tackled one of them on my front lawn, but he struggled free and got away. I saw the getaway car and tried to keep repeating the license number, but it faded away in my mind as I was repeating it. I remember vividly being so mad at myself that I couldn't remember 7 numbers, and how stupid I was for not grabbing my phone. Looking back on the situation, there are so many things that happened that I never noticed, like how I fractured my arm slamming into the wall at the bottom of my stairs, and that I cut my feet up on the splintered wood of my front door. The adrenaline rush of a true fight or flight situation is something so strange, it's almost impossible to accurately describe. The sense of time, not being aware of pain and injury for hours, and the hyper-focus on some details but complete loss of others. Luckily, I wasn't seriously hurt and nothing was stolen, but I installed cameras all over my house the very next day. Personally, I was hoping it would be a story where the animal wakes you up and saves the day. But when Opie said it came up to his room to hide, that was a little funny to me, despite how serious the situation was. Still, got the job done. Opie immediately knew that something was very wrong. So hey, Mr. Whiskers, you may not be a guard dog by any stretch, but I think you at the very least helped Opie out a bit. The remembering a license plate thing though, I've thought about this and I'm so scared what would happen if I tried that. Like if I really had to remember something, would I be able to, or would the pressure just get to me? Kinda freaks me out, honestly. I'm not sure. Story 6. My boyfriend Jay and I were staying with 2 friends of his, Jim and Jeremy. Jeremy had left the apartment an hour or so before Jay, and I decided to go to bed. A few minutes after Jay fell asleep, I heard a knock on the door and Jim answered it. Turns out it was Jeremy, but he wasn't alone. 2 guys that also lived in the apartment building forced Jeremy to knock at the door so they could force their way in, as he didn't have his keys with him. Once they were inside, I could hear what sounded like a scuffle from where I was in the bedroom with the door closed. I woke Jay up and all of a sudden we hear 2 unknown voices yelling, "Get down! Get the hell on the ground!" Jay wanted to go see what was going on, but I begged him to stay in the bedroom with me, which he did. After what seemed like a couple minutes of arguing and fighting sounds, everything went absolutely silent. We opened the bedroom door to see Jim laying on the ground with what we later found out to be a barbed machete sticking out of his chest. Jeremy was calling 911. The apartment building didn't have a buzzer to let anyone into the building, so when the police got there, Jay let them in and showed them to the suite we were in. After that, they separated us all and put the 3 of us into the back of 3 different police cars, where they left us while the paramedics tried to save Jim. Unfortunately, they weren't able to save him. He died at the apartment. I knew he was dead when the paramedics wheeled him out to the ambulance, but didn't leave for at least 5 minutes without working on him at all. The police took us to be questioned, again keeping us separated the entire time. About 12 hours later, they were ready to let us go, but told us we weren't allowed to go back to the apartment as it was an active crime scene. We were dropped off by the police at a coffee shop with no money, phones, wallets, or even shoes on our feet, as they wouldn't let us take anything from the apartment before they put us in the police cars before being questioned. We ended up going to a friend's house where we stayed until we were let back into the apartment 4 or 5 days later. Once we were finally allowed back into the apartment, the first thing I had to do was clean up the blood, which I'm sure you can imagine was pretty hard to handle. It was pretty traumatic. Story 7. My door was kicked in at just after 2 a.m. I walked out into the living room holding my gun. I said, "I'm armed," loudly, and at that point I heard someone chamber a round into a pistol and I started shooting. I hit him twice and he died. I have no regrets. Police told me he had just gotten out of prison a few days before for a similar crime. Story 8. 4 guys knocked on my buddy's door at 11 p.m. He lived with a bunch of other guys, so this wasn't anything new. They burst in and held a gun to his neck and demanded the drugs. He stammered that there weren't any drugs, but they could take whatever they wanted. One guy held him there with the gun while the others searched the house. Since they didn't find anything, they realized that they had the wrong house and left. As they were leaving, the last guy said, "Sorry, this wasn't my idea." Story 9. My cousin's grandparents' house got broken into. I was still very young, and my parents and I just left their house 30 minutes ago when we got the phone call that there was a robbery. There were 5 to 8 intruders who came armed and beat both of them very badly, and them being elderly didn't help either. Anyway, they were admitted to a hospital but sadly passed away a few weeks later. Just makes me wonder. I probably would have been dead too if we stayed a bit longer. They were so nice too. Makes me sad it happened to them. I may be able to muster the smallest amount of empathy for someone who does this out of a true desperation scenario. And by this, I just mean a home invasion. Maybe you're going in to take some stuff. For some reason, you really, really, really need the money. I don't know. A little bit of sympathy. I still don't love it, obviously. But if it's ever to the point where you are beating 2 elderly people to death, that tiny bit of sympathy has vanished. Just a senseless and truly horrible act. OP, I'm truly sorry you had to experience that. And I'm even more sorry for your cousin's grandparents, who I can guarantee you didn't deserve that in the slightest. Story 10. I was in college and had the only room on the ground floor. I was bartending, so I got home at like 3:30 a.m. I had just changed and gotten into bed when I heard someone fiddling with my window screen. Lived in a beach town, and I usually left my windows cracked open to hear the ocean as I fell asleep. My first thought was it was one of my roommates who forgot their keys or something, but I realized they would have called me first. So I flattened myself against the foot of my bed and the wall to look. It was a dude in a black hoodie with a box cutter cutting my window screen. As he was lifting himself to enter, I jumped onto my bed and kicked him as hard as I could in the chest. He fell onto the parking lot, hit a bike rack, and was knocked unconscious. I slammed my window shut, bolted it, and called the cops. By the time they showed, he was gone, but they found him 2 blocks away. His bag had zip ties and duct tape in it, and he had a history of assault. The cops blamed me a bit for having my windows open. I keep my windows shut after that. Story 11. Was in 7th grade, home alone after a half day, when suddenly there was a very hard knocking on the back door. I knew immediately something was off because we never have visitors, and my father doesn't knock like that. I froze up in my room. I peek out of my room right in front of the back door, and suddenly it's quiet, so I go back to my room. As soon as I close my door, I hear glass shatter. I turned off my computer and TV and dove under my bed. For the next 40 minutes, I hear him thrashing around my living room and parents' room. Then, hear them leave. During this, I'm on call with the cops who think I'm prank calling them, and they take 70 minutes to finally come over. The station is 3 streets away from my house. They come and investigate only to find out it was our next-door neighbor that broke in, who is looking for drug money. As it turns out, the previous person to live here did at-home haircuts and sold weed on the side. The neighbor was arrested and his family moved out a week later. The only thing this guy took was lunch money I left on a counter outside for the next day. I feel like I don't have to say that it's absolutely absurd it took 70 minutes for them to respond to your call, OP. What happened to the whole you have to treat every call like a real call until proven otherwise? I hope that dispatcher got an earful from the supervisor. Story 12. My aunt and cousin had a legit home invasion happen many years ago. Gang members came to the door and barged in, pistol whipped my cousin, tore the house up. The intruders didn't speak English and apparently had the wrong house. After realizing it was the wrong house, they left. This was in Tucson, Arizona, probably about 20 years ago. Story 13. When I was 11, my closest friend had a home invasion involving a local gang. Her father fought back. They stabbed him 14 times and shot him twice. They then held the wife and 2 of the children hostage. The 3rd little girl slept through it all, tied them up and stole all electronics and their car. After the robbers left, they went looking for Dad, and the youngest found him dead in the swimming pool. The entire suburb was devastated. He was the loveliest guy, had a black belt in karate, and did his best to fend off at least 4 intruders. After his death, they sold the house and moved across the country. Can't blame them. Story 14. Freaked the hell out, let them take whatever they wanted, and held my cat. It was friends of my sister. She screwed them over on some drugs, and I guess I was convenient. They took almost all my electronics and raided the fridge. Story 15. I was sleeping after a night shift. Woke up, went to the kitchen to see two guys working on my sliding glass door with a screwdriver. I was still half asleep and it took a few seconds to register. Got my .22 rifle, my only gun at the time, and opened up the side kitchen door. Their getaway driver was parked across the street and started honking. They bolted. I walked out in my underwear with rifle to watch them peel out, but I'm sure they would have gotten in had they had another 10 minutes. Story 16. At 6 a.m. in November of 1989, I woke up to my bedroom window being opened. I was a young girl, 14 at the time. I froze and pretended to be asleep. After a few seconds/minutes, I realized the man couldn't fit through my window. My bedroom windows were especially narrow. When he realized I was awake, he left. I then ran to the living room, woke my mother, and called 911. The man was caught in my neighborhood shortly after my call. I had to identify him and he was charged with attempted burglary. He later pled to trespassing. When I came from school that day, I found my stereo missing out of my bedroom. It was the only thing stolen in the whole house. The second perp, probably the same suspect from earlier that day, also left the gate open in my yard. My 3-year-old basset hound Violet escaped from the yard and was hit by a car and died that same day. I want to add that as a young child, I had recurrent nightmares about a man breaking into my bedroom. The nightmare was short, just a man trying to get into my bedroom through the exact window that was used in my real-life experience. I would wake up every time after the man would open the window and try to get into my room. After my real-life experience, I never had that nightmare again. Story 17. My mom was super into medieval decor. I was 4 and my sister was 10. This guy breaks in with a shotgun and my 5'2" mom with the craziest curly red hair, think the girl from the movie Brave, and wearing a robe, grabs a bastard sword off the wall and rushes the dude. I think the dude was so much in shock he forgot he had a gun and just took off running. Lesson learned, you don't screw with a Scottish woman's children. I just know that as that robber was running away, he was thinking, just my luck. I break into the one house in this entire town that would have a sword on the wall. Don't get me wrong, well deserved. Story 18. Slept through it. It was the last night we spent in the house before moving into another in the same city. Moving company finished that day. 5 guys tied up my dad and threatened to assault my mom and I. Both slept through the whole thing. Held him at gunpoint. 3 hours later, we had no TV, phones, some wine and clothes were stolen. We really just kept what was important to us that night. When they left, my dad got off his restraints and woke us up. Luckily, they didn't take the cars, so we drove in our neighborhood until we found someone to call help. Some guy was sneaking his girlfriend back into her parents' house and begged us not to make a huge noise, but we were a few houses down, so no worries. Story 19. Couple weeks before my 19th birthday, I woke up one morning around 4 a.m. while someone was trying to break my bedroom door down. I'd fallen asleep with my light on after coming in tired from work. So when they came into my room, I could at least see what was happening. Not that it helped much at first. There were 2 guys and one of them immediately attacked me with a hammer, so I told them to just take whatever they wanted. The other guy started to load all my electronics into a backpack. Meanwhile, my mother down the hall had woken up with the commotion and started shouting to know what was going on, staying in her room at least. Next moment, they both ran out of my room and shut the door on the way out, going to my mother's. She managed to hold the door closed on them for a few seconds, giving me time to open the safe in my cupboard. 6-digit key code that I amazingly input correctly the first time, and removed my pistol. I checked for a round in the chamber, and went to open the door to make my way to my mother's room. As I opened the door, one of the guys turned around and ran at me with a hammer. I fired 2 shots before he could get to me and push me back into my room and onto my bed where he held me down and tried to take my pistol, while the other guy started to cut my arm and head with what turned out to be one of my mother's own kitchen knives. My mother eventually joined the fray and managed to take the knife away from the guy cutting me. Meanwhile, I was just holding onto the pistol with everything I had in me, because I knew that if one of them got control of it, my mother and I would be dead. My mother froze after she took the knife away and the guy got up, grabbing my DVD player and knocked my TV to the ground, then hit me over the head with the DVD player. By this time, I managed to sort of wrestle my gun hand free and shouted to my mother to get out of the way for me to try to get another shot. She rolled off of the bed and I managed to turn the gun enough to get a shot off on the guy on top of me. It was then they decided to bolt and grabbed a bag of electronics on the way out. When the cops came, they found a body with 2 gunshot wounds in my garden a few meters away from the house, and a blood trail leading away, where it disappeared at a nearby road. Story 20. About 10 years ago, some guy broke down my mom's front door at 2 a.m. The noise of it woke her up, and she came out of her bedroom and saw the guy messing with the papers on her desk. Thinking there was money there, maybe, my mom's little dog was barking for all he was worth, and my mom was yelling my name. The yelling and barking woke me up upstairs in the guest bedroom, so I came running down the stairs making a lot of noise. The guy ran off, because of my mom, the barking dog, me coming down the stairs, who knows. I ran out onto the street after him, but he was gone. Called the cops. They showed up in less than 5 minutes. The officer was very nice. The next day, my mom got a new door with a longer deadbolt. It's a very quiet neighborhood. Haven't heard of such a thing happening to anybody else. Not sure if the guy was just crazy, at the wrong house, thought nobody was home, or something else. Story 21. It was one of the worst experiences of my life. 3 men broke in whilst I was home with my husband. I was also pregnant. I managed to keep the lounge door shut by putting myself against it. I had some bad bruises and damage to my wrist, but physically I was mostly okay. My husband got acid thrown in his face. Luckily, it really only caught his forehead. We both suffered terribly mentally afterwards. My husband, after having the acid thrown in his face, ran and locked himself in the bathroom. They were mostly focused on trying to get into the lounge where I was. I have no idea how I physically kept them out. It still awes me to this day. I also managed to call the police and ambulance whilst they were still in my home, but they left before the police arrived. They could hear me on the phone. They took some stuff from upstairs, but that was all. The police didn't believe us and didn't bother investigating the crime. The 3 men were never caught. I live in the same home and I really struggle with the fear of home invasion. All my doors are always double locked and I'm very careful with windows. What do you mean the police didn't believe you? I feel like something is missing from here, because unless it was an inside job, I don't see why the police would not believe OP when there is acid on her husband's face. Also just stuff missing? I don't know. Story 22. Not me, but a roommate in his previous house. Roommate ended an intruder in his entryway. Had a guy walk up to the open door midday and walk into the house. Windows were large and the guy could clearly see inside that my roommate and his adult sister were inside. Entered the house anyway. After confronting the guy, it became apparent the guy wasn't confused and deliberately entered. Roommate tackled him and managed to pin him down through a struggle. Yelled for his sister to grab a gun. Sister brought it back and he held it against the guy till the guy calmed down, with the guy fully aware that he had a gun pressed into his side. Roommate disentangles himself slowly and gets some distance, backing up 10 feet from the guy. Sister is calling the cops at this point. Guy stands up and faces my roommate, who is clearly pointing a gun at him. Guy gets aggressive again. Starts moving toward my roommate and reaches into his jacket pocket. Roommate proceeds to unload and drop the guy on the spot. Police arrive and clear the situation. Shooting was ruled self-defense and roommate was cleared. I believe the guy was found to be heavily under the influence, but not sure what. Roommate ended up struggling heavily with PTSD from this event, as well as follow-up events in the military. Heavy stuff. Story 23. My dog scared off what I believe to be robbers or home invaders. I was at home cooking dinner one night and I was about 8 months pregnant at the time. My husband had to work about 2 hours away from our home on this particular day. Anyway, as I was standing in our kitchen cooking, our dog, Blue Heeler, suddenly got alarmed out of nowhere, and his hair raised on his back and he was growling and barking. Well, next thing I know, someone knocked at our door. I go to answer the door and our dog stepped in front of me. As soon as I opened the door, our dog almost ran out in pure anger, but I held him back by his collar. There was a man standing on our porch and I asked, "Can I help you?" The man then said, "We're here to pick up the washer and dryer." After he said that, I looked in the driveway and there was a tiny car, no bigger than a Honda Civic, out there. I immediately said, "There's no washer or dryer here for anyone to pick up." The man then said aggressively, "I told you we're here to pick up the washer and dryer." Mind you, this whole time I'm having to hold our dog back by his collar. He knew something wasn't right and so did I. I then said, "Sir, there's nothing here for you, so please leave." You could tell the man was getting more and more scared of our dog because he kept backing up. He then just turned around and walked to his car and I could tell there were multiple people in the car as well. I let go of my dog's collar and he stood on the porch, growling with his hair raised the entire time the guy was walking to his car. Then when the guy got to his car, they all sat there for like 10 minutes and my dog never moved off the porch. He stayed there growling the whole time. By this time, I grabbed our shotgun we keep by our door. They then drove off, and my dog came back inside with me and wouldn't leave my side. I called my husband in a panic, because what if they tried to come back? My husband said he was about 15 minutes away from the house, and he was hurrying as fast as he could. Our dog truly saved mine and the baby's life. He was so protective, and I know if I would have let him go, he would have attacked this man without question. It was truly a scary experience. I wish our dog was still alive today, but he sadly passed a year ago. He absolutely adored our son. OP, I hope that dog, wherever he is now, is getting all the pets and all the treats he could ever want. Because did he ever work for them that day? The almost supernatural ability to tell when something's wrong is just a fascinating thing about animals. Because really it seems like they just feel it in the air or something. Story 24. My brother and I were kids, 10 and 9, and my parents had gone out for a few hours. Someone knocked on the door, and when we opened it, he barged past us into the house and bolted into the living room. We tentatively followed him to see what he was doing and found him sitting on the couch playing with my dad's guitar. He was childlike, so we sat with him for a while till we we heard another knock at the door. One of the neighborhood aunties had been looking for him and she took him away. When my parents got home, they explained he has trisomy 21. Story 25. Blocked the doors when it became clear that someone was trying to break in. My husband and I were staying with a friend and her husband. Her stepson and elderly mother-in-law were also in the house. Someone had heard the old lady had jewelry and decided to try their luck. We heard this later through the town grapevine. Said person then escalated to trying to kick his way in through the windows. They were leaded. My husband called the police while my friend tried to keep the child calm, and her husband and I screamed a lot and sort of flailed at the protruding feet with pokers from the old fireplace. On realizing there were more of us than there were of him, he ran off. Good thing, too. The police never showed. They called 5 days later to see if we, quote, still needed the assistance. Bloody useless. In comparison, 6 months later I arrived at work to discover the door and cash drawer had been jimmied and the 50-pound float nicked, and they were overtaking fingerprints inside the hour. I wonder why trust in the police is so low. Total mystery. Story 26. A dude kicked the door in to beat up my roommate who just got home from a late night of gambling. I was in the back and heard the commotion. I called 911 and they didn't take me seriously. Until I said it sounded like someone was going to get murdered. The cops came and I was told to leave the house. I walked to the front of the house, and blood was everywhere. The floor, the walls, etc. The fight had broken windows and spread into the hallway and kitchen. I backed out of the house and was dragged across the yard by the police. I told them I didn't see anyone in the house. They entered and there was commotion when they found my roommate hiding next to his bed. The police were upset I didn't see him. He was dragged out on a stretcher and the neighbors were watching, probably figuring I beat the crap out of him. I was fixing the windows when he walked home from the hospital still wearing a gown and hospital slippers. He didn't want to pay to be admitted. He looked like he'd escaped an asylum. We never spoke about it after he repaired the damage. My tip? Just say murder when you call 911. A lot of police will come very quickly. Story 27. Guy who stalked me broke into my home with his buddy. I had a messed up sleep schedule, so I was awake at 3 or so a.m. I grabbed my little dog and my phone and went to the basement. It was a little cellar almost. A trapdoor in the floor with stairs that led down to a small space with a furnace, hot water tank, etc., and got my dog and I into the crawl space. I'd had some cardboard on top of the door so they didn't see when it was closed. I turned my phone on silent and texted my best friend asking her to call the cops for me. After the longest 15 minutes of my life, the cops eventually got there, arrested the dude and his buddy, and came to find me. These two jerks had what the police described to me as an assault and disposal kit. Duct tape, lube, toys, a handsaw, and a box of heavy-duty big black garbage bags, which implied intent and planning. So they went away for conspiracy to commit murder, conspiracy to commit assault, breaking and entering, and something else I can't remember. The guy who actually stalked me pinned it all on his buddy. So buddy went away for 5 years and is still in prison because he can't not act like a psycho, while stalker served 2 3/4 of a year of his 4-year sentence, threw his buddy under the bus and took a plea deal for himself and later got out on good behavior. Got a restraining order, which he violated a couple of times right away. It had been quiet for a bit until he got a girlfriend a couple of years ago. He told her his version, in which he was the victim and I was the villain, who sent him away to jail for nothing. So she sent me a long, nasty text message telling me she would find me and make me pay for it. So predictably, the cops got to go talk to both of them. Haven't heard from them since. It is astonishing to me that two people with that much intent to do some bad things get 5 years and 2.75 or 4 years or whatever OP said, and the fact that they could have any contact at all with OP afterwards and not be immediately punished for it is insane to me. Good way to make someone feel unsafe forever, guys. Great work. Story 28. Not me, but my friend woke up in the middle of the night to use the bathroom. As he was finishing up, the Ring camera motion detector picked up someone at his door at 3 a.m. My friend ran to the front door just as the intruder started trying to force the door open. My friend watched on the Ring camera and was verging on panic, so he shouted at the intruder through the door. He wanted to sound tough and intimidating, but his courage failed him at the last minute. And he said, "Get out of here or I'm gonna screw you." He meant to say, screw you up. But that's when his nerve failed him, so instead of "I'm gonna screw you up," he just said, "I'm going to screw you." Through the Ring camera, he watched the intruder freeze up, look scared, slowly back away from the door, and make a run for it. So I guess things worked out okay in the end. And yes, my friend handed the Ring footage over to the cops. The cops arrested the guy a day or two later for something else. Story 29. I was in bed upstairs, home from work because I was sick. Someone knocked on the front door. I didn't answer because I felt like crap. A little while later, I heard a strange thud in my kitchen. My cats who were laying with me became alert, which made me nervous. So I went downstairs to investigate. As I was coming down the stairs, I saw a young man in my kitchen and another outside the kitchen window. I yelled, "What the hell?" in a deeper tone than I normally would have. I think it was some kind of instinct. They got scared and ran for the back door, which was locked. I actually had to explain to the inside guy that you have to do the top lock first. He shoved a chair at me, unlocked the door, and ran off with his friend. I wasn't scared in the moment, only afterward. In fact, I felt kind of bad for the guy when it was happening. He looked like he was maybe 15 and scared crapless that someone was home. Story 30. Not my case personally, but I was a prosecutor, involved in a case where an older woman was about to take a shower when an intruder attacked her. This was back in the day when we had corded telephones. She started to try to call the police and he grabbed her. She beat him in the head with the telephone and then grabbed his family jewels, twisting very hard. He yelled something like, "Lady, you're gonna end me!" And she yelled back, "What do you think you were trying to do to me?" He ran out of the house and she got her pistol and started shooting at him. When the cops arrived, he ran to the police car yelling that crazy lady was trying to murder him. He was arrested and convicted. Story 31. Choked him unconscious and held him until the police showed up. I dragged him to the front door and handed him to the cops. He's still in prison. Super scary situation, but the adrenaline hit made me real strong. A lot could have gone really wrong and I got super lucky. I think back on that a lot. I was carrying a big pocket knife. I passed by the kitchen and there were plenty of items I could have used as a weapon. If I would have ended or significantly injured him, I think my life would have been much worse. When he came down the stairs, we were only a few feet apart. I yelled something like, "Get the hell out of my house," and then attacked him. I didn't have interest in fighting him, but I was acting on instinct. It all happened really fast. The weird part was holding him in the rear naked choke after he came around, when it took like 5 to 8 minutes for the cops to arrive. I have a real clear memory of the texture of his hair and what he smelled like. It was super intimate in a really weird way. Story 32. Honestly, not much happened. They must have not thought anybody was home. I thought my parents had gotten home because I heard noises in the house, but then my door started to open. I pushed my chair back to see why they were opening the door without knocking, and they ran away before I could see anything. Door slammed open. Nothing taken because I guess they were clearing it first. Either way, as any person who's been in a home invasion would say, regardless of how violent, homes don't feel safe after it. You can't leave without being afraid all of your crap is going to be taken, and you can't sleep without knowing somebody could just walk in at any moment with any intentions, and there's only so much you can do. Story 33. Wife woke me up from hearing a noise downstairs. We lived in an apartment above a garage, so I stupidly thought it was her boss. Their house had an electrical panel in a downstairs room, so I walk downstairs, go into the garage and flip the light on, and it's not her boss. So I start asking this dude who he is and why he's here. He's making excuses like saying, John told him to get some stuff. My wife eventually got her bosses and they came down and asked the dude a bunch of crap. Was gonna let the dude go after he put everything down, but we noticed he had a bag and asked what was in it. He said his clothes and it turned out to be my jacket. So then the cops came and took him away. Thank God the dude wasn't dangerous because I went downstairs with nothing to defend myself. Story 34. I was in bed and I woke up to the sound of my dogs all quietly growling. I knew right then that something was wrong, so I grabbed my Mossberg and crept down the stairs. When I got down to the main level, there was a guy poking around like he was looking for something. So I yell at him to put his hands up, and when he turns around, I can tell he's holding a long gun of some kind despite it being dark. So I just shoot. He goes down, but he gets up and runs off screaming his head off. And by the way he was screaming, it sounded like he was screaming at someone else. So I follow him and I see him get into a car that's parked in my driveway with however many guys, and they all peel off. So naturally, I called the police and they came and did their thing and told me if anything was found, they would let me know. Story 35. I wouldn't necessarily call it a home invasion, but we had a strung-out woman walk into our apartment a couple years ago. We live on the 3rd floor of a 3-story walk-up, and we were watching TV in the bedroom when we heard a knock on the door. We both got up expecting our landlord, and before we got out of the room into the living room where the door is, the door opened and this woman walked in. She was asking where she was and where Eminem was. My boyfriend threatened to call the cops, and she looked at him confused and asked about Eminem again. He then grabbed her by the arm, walked her to the door and pushed her into the hallway. We assumed she made her way back down the stairs and outside. Just amazed, she managed to bypass 2 other floors and get to ours. Story 36. Was about 4 years ago. For some reason, a few hours leading up to the event, I was feeling uneasy and on edge. This was 3 hours prior, and I even consciously thought it was weird, because I had a buddy over and was playing my favorite video game, but I just could not enjoy myself. Unusually, my father was also up very late watching TV in the lounge, and he too later commented he felt like he was being watched. Approximately an hour after he turned into bed, everything happened at once. We believe at least 3 men tried to quietly pull a window out of our double doors, French-type doors, to get in, but they dropped the pane, and when it shattered, everyone was alerted. Shouting, barking, and screaming commenced, and then they tried to break down the door to get in and grab anything convenient. Unfortunately for them, we had a large bird cage blocking the door on the inside, and they couldn't get in. They decided to make their getaway, and while doing so, one of them threw a brick at the window my father was looking through and broke that pane as well. While this was all going down, my buddy and I stayed in my room, door shut and locked. I grabbed a nearby skateboard, only thing I had that could be weaponized, and it felt like everything was happening very slowly, especially because I could hear but not see what was going on. For reference, we have a freestanding house that at the time had an empty plot next door. We think they jumped over the concrete wall as there's palisade fencing in front of our house. Story 37. I'm a tax preparer with a home office. My troubles started when an ID theft ring found me on the dark web. First, they got personal stuff from my mailbox. They stole my bank account and got credit cards in my name. Shortly afterward, noticed my trash polycart missing from my driveway. A day later, I went to open my back gate so I could mow. That's when I found the cart stuck against the fence, so that I couldn't tell that they'd broken it to get into my backyard. A day or two before that, I'd been working in my front yard. The next morning I woke up to find the front door left open. I thought I had done it when I was going in and out with tools. When I saw the poly cart, I put two and two together and realized they had gone through my backyard to my atrium into my house. Of course, my office was locked, so they couldn't get in there to steal my clients' IDs. There was nothing of value in my house, so they left. They did drop a cheap skull ring that I found later. I had been sleeping in my bedroom with my door wide open the whole time. Never heard a thing. I'm happy I live in a small enough place that if someone were to break in or get in somehow, I would know immediately. Even if I were sleeping, there is not a lot of room for people to sneak around without me hearing. So that's at least some comfort, but I'm sure that the idea for OP that people were sneaking around their home, all while the door was open and they were asleep, is probably deeply unsettling. Story 38. I was in the process of cutting all contact with an abusive ex, and had been ignoring her for a week or so, and not responding to any messages. One night I was in bed, about 7 beers deep, and someone starts banging on my door. I think, well, I'm not opening that. Didn't own a gun or anything at the time, and felt frozen just from watching the door shake. I was on the 3rd floor of an apartment complex, and she jumped onto my balcony and smashed out the bottom part of the balcony door, window panes, with her shirt wrapped around her hand. I ran into the bathroom and put my back up against the toilet, and my feet against the bathroom door, and the bathroom door was not one that locked. Cheap apartment complex and the doors were garbage. She's backing up to the furthest end of the living room and throwing her body weight against the door over and over and over. And I was just on the phone with police giving them my information, and I guess the adrenaline made me stronger than I really am. At the time, I was a 21-year-old woman with no muscles really. Eventually, she realizes I'm on the phone, and changes her whole tone into this weird, baby-sweet voice. She asked me, "Baby, who are you in there with? I'm not gonna hurt you." I responded and told her the police were coming, and she screamed the most unhinged scream I've ever heard another human make, and ran out into the parking lot where she was apprehended and arrested. She only stayed in jail 2 days for it, even though she was threatening violence the entire time she was trying to get into the bathroom. The next day she showed up at my apartment again, and forced her way inside and held me captive for a day with a knife, and kept my phone on her person at all times so I couldn't call anyone. I got out of it by pretending that I'd forgiven her and that we were still going to be together, but that she needed to go home and figure out her jail bond situation. It surprisingly worked. I've never spoken to her again since I threatened her with a restraining order. You never think that you'll be the one to freeze when someone is breaking in, but the panic just takes over, and fight or flight kicks in hard. There also is this very real realization that you might have to end someone if you initiate any type of self-defense. I think that's the main reason I didn't fight back when she held me hostage. The idea of having to fight and possibly end someone in self-defense was very hard for me to act on. Story 39. Not my story, but a client I used to work with. He was home with his daughters when 3 men broke in. He woke up when they broke a window. He put his daughters in his closet with his cell phone to call 911 and got his shotgun. He crept to the top of the stairs since he could hear them all moving around and talking downstairs. He warned them that he had a gun and to get out. They replied that they also had guns, so he better run. So he fired towards the ground as best he could in the dark. He hears screaming as his shot wasn't aimed low enough. He saw 2 shadows run away but could still hear the screaming. His buck spray severed one of the men's legs off above the knee, and his buddies left him. The man bled out in his living room before an ambulance could arrive, despite him applying a tourniquet. Police arrive and separate him from his traumatized kid and then arrest him. Kid had to go with a social worker until they released him the next day. They caught the other 2 the next day as well. My client was never the same knowing he had ended a man, despite knowing he was protecting his daughter. Story 40. When my mom was about 10 years old, she was home alone, and her home was broken into in the middle of the afternoon, broad daylight. I think there were at least 3 guys. She was terrified, because it was pretty shortly after Eton Pats had been abducted, and he had grown up relatively near her. Kidnapping has always been one of her biggest fears. She hid in a closet, and I believe a neighbor witnessed the break-in happening and called the police. The burglars got away before the cops arrived, but were later caught with the stolen items. They never had any idea she was home. Story 41. Parents went out of town for the weekend. I was 16 at the time. We live in a pretty rural town of about 1,500 people. I was streaming my game and having a blast. Had ordered pizza and the night was going great. Now, ever since my parents would leave for weekends, I knew where my stepdad had a pistol, a Ruger 9mm. Whenever they would leave, I felt safer having the pistol with me. So when this all first started, I learned and got trained in pistols. It's about 11:30 to 12 at night when I hear a loud bang, and the floor beneath me shook. Coincidentally, there was a door to the basement below where my desk sat. So I calmly told my stream I'd be back, grabbed the pistol, and flagged the door from our kitchen that led to the basement for about 5 minutes. Nobody came up, so I go to the basement door and really quietly open it up. I hear whispering and shuffling of things. I flicked the light onto the stairs of the basement and said, "I'm going to give you till 10 to leave this house or you're not going to like the outcome." And it turned pin drop silent. I started counting from 10, and once I hit 5, I racked the slide chamber around, and as they heard that slide rack back, all I heard was shuffling and stuff being dropped, and they ran out the back door. I'm thankful they left because I didn't want to shoot anyone, but I wasn't going to let someone steal from my family. Came to find out it was a relative that was privy to my parents' departure and figured I wouldn't be around either. Story 42. Not a home invasion, but an ex and I were coming home from a night out and the front door of her condo was open. She started the "you didn't close the door" thing, so we walked up and I turned on the light and there was an old man there with her jewelry box in his hand. She knew who it was her downstairs neighbor. So I stood in the doorway and called 911, and kept him there until they showed up. When the cops showed up, I looked down, it was a second-floor entry, and saw a lady hiding behind the dumpsters. I said, "He's not going anywhere," but the lady behind the dumpsters might, and the cops got her and our DVD player. I ID'd it by telling them what would be in there, and it was. They were probably both whacked out of their minds, and the lady swore she found the DVD player in the parking lot. The guy's excuse was that he was outside and saw elves climbing up into her balcony and going into the house, so he was going to get the valuables out so they couldn't get to them. And you had that man arrested? He saved your ex's jewelry from elves, and you had him arrested. Shame on you, OP. Story 43. When I was little, me and my parents were in California visiting family. We live in Arizona. We drove home earlier than we planned, and when we got to the house, it was around 1 to 2 a.m. The front doors were open and so much stuff was gone. We had an idea it was my brother, but I don't know if it was confirmed. He had a drug problem, so it could have been. We called the cops and nothing came of it. I just remember being so upset because my 3DS and the Wii were gone. Story 44. My wife and I sleep in separate bedrooms because I snore. I woke up at 3 a.m. to my wife frantically whispering there was somebody in the house. In fact, he was right across the hall in the bathroom looking for pills, perhaps. I told my wife to get our daughter and go lock themselves in our detached garage. I tried to sneak into the master bedroom to get to the gun safe, but the intruder looked over at me just as I passed the bathroom. I slammed the door in his face and sprinted into the bedroom. I have a pistol safe that opens very quickly with a keypad. He was coming out of the bathroom just as I racked the slide to put around in the chamber. I told him to get back into the bathroom or I was going to shoot him in the face. He went back into the bathroom and I called 911. He played a little peekaboo at the bathroom door, but I told him if he did it again, I was going to shoot him. The police were there quickly. I was naked the whole time. Always leave a robe by the bed. Story 45. When I was staying with my brother, he let a mutual friend of ours stay there as well. He was selling weed and would constantly bring people by to sell to them, even though I repeatedly told him not to. One night, me and my brother were playing Borderlands when there was a knock at the door around midnight. I answered and someone I didn't know asked for our friend, who wasn't there. That's when someone who was standing on the side out of sight appeared and put a gun in my face. My first instinct was to grab the gun, and we both wrestled with it for a few seconds. That's when I had 2 more guns shoved in my face. I had no choice but to back off. 4 people entered, one of whom had brass knuckles. They made me lay on my stomach. At one point, I felt someone come up behind me and I got hit with something. Not sure what it was, but it was probably a gun or the brass knuckles. I immediately tried to lift myself up to defend myself when I got knocked out. Still have the scar on my cheek. When I came to, they were gone, and my brother was just standing there with a look of shock on his face, with blood on the back of his head. Those cowards hit him with a salsa jar, which caused him to get staples on the back of his head. I went to a neighbor's apartment and asked them to call the police. My brother was taken to the hospital. Still don't know who they were, but if I ever find out, that will be the last time they ever do some coward crap like that again. This happened around 2011. Story 46. I was absurdly lucky when it happened, 12 years ago. Single female, ground floor flat on a private garden. Must have been targeted. The dude snapped the lock of the garden-facing windows and snuck in the middle of the night with a rucksack. And what must have been a pocket full of rubbers? I only know that because we found some on the ground. What he hadn't expected was that the day before, a friend of a friend had a pipe break in his flat and totally wrecked his place. Said friend called in a favor for his buddy and I agreed to take him in. The dude was a huge, red-headed, scarified, tattooed psych nurse and Fun as hell. I sat him in a cot in my living room, the same room that had the garden facing windows. When the wannabe intruder stumbled in, he wasn't faced by a scared, defenseless woman, but by a very startled, very angry, beefy dude who bellowed at him. I was woken up by my guardian angel temporary roommate, a scream of terror from the invader, and the sound of said invader face planting when he jumped the garden fence. Blood smears the morning after led me to hope he really hurt himself. Red-headed tattooed guardian angel was welcome to stay as long as he needed to, and I started to sleep with a machete behind my bedroom door. Story 47. I was 7, and I used to sleep in my parents' bedroom. Their bed was right by a window, which was where my bed was. I heard a knock and scream on the window, and I woke up my parents. My middle brother, 22, woke up since his bedroom was next to my parents', and he had a metal pipe in hand just in case. Him and my dad went outside to check what was going on, and me and my mom went to go wake up my older brother, 24. He told us to call the cops and stay in his room unless we hear something, then to run to the second floor and ask for help from the neighbors. They let me and my mom in, and we waited until it was okay to go back. A few minutes go by and we heard the window get smashed in, and me and my mom ran upstairs. It took the cops almost an hour, and my middle brother had gotten injured trying to keep the man from going anywhere in our home. When the cops did get there, they tried to arrest my brother, not the guy who broke in. My older brother had to repeatedly tell them to let my brother go. They finally arrested the other guy after that. My brother had to be taken to the hospital, and so did the guy. Turns out the guy was friends with people in the building next to us, and he was on some heavy stuff. Who knows what would have happened if I hadn't woken up. I still vividly remember that night and his screams. The guy was also released from jail a few years ago, and I used to see him on the streets after the neighbors moved out. I don't think he remembers what he did, but we certainly do. Story 49. A man kicked in my door when I was home. I lived in an apartment townhome. He lost his balance and fell to the stairs. I got up, grabbed him by his shirt, and threw him to the ground. I beat that man so bad his eyeballs weren't in his head anymore. I dragged him outside and left him for 30 minutes. I needed the time to calm down. I then called 911 and told them to bring an ambulance. He hadn't moved the entire time. The police and ambulance showed up. I knew some of the officers and they asked me why I didn't shoot him. Frankly, I didn't have to. Their comment was that it would have made their paperwork easier if I had. So the guy went to the hospital and lived. I know this because he showed up at my door at 5 the next morning. I called the police and they took him to jail. He had fled the hospital and made it 4 miles to my home. I was still trying to clean the blood out of my carpet, didn't work, when his kids showed up asking me to drop the charges. He had just moved in the apartment 3 doors down from me. He was drunk and thought he would just kick the door into his apartment because he couldn't find his keys. I hate this memory, but I thought he was there to do harm, obviously. I'm glad I didn't shoot him. He was just a drunk fool. OP, I can understand why when someone kicks your door down, you perceive them to be a threat. It does sort of just seem like an unfortunate circumstance, but it is probably a good thing you didn't shoot him. I do hope that guy has sobered up since then, for the sake of his kids at the very least. Story 50. I was woken up in the middle of the night by my dog barking. Got up and went downstairs to look through the window in the door. A man was standing there fiddling with the door. Ran back up to my room and got the bat. Calmly walked down to the door, unlocked it, and swung the door open and swung the club right into the person's calf. He went straight to the ground, but got up almost immediately. So I hit him one more time, went to the ground one more time, actually stood up, and I sped up and hit him in the leg one more time with what I had. He crawled out of my courtyard while I walked behind him to say that he was not allowed to show himself here again. The funny thing about this was, the next day there were police further down my street who had stopped someone. I went over and asked them what happened, and they told me that they'd arrested some burglars. I explained that I had had an attempt at my place at night, but the police opened the door at the back of the police car, and yes, there sat the same man with a plaster cast. The man didn't recognize me. He must have been so drunk the night before. Story 51. Someone tried our door after my brother had left around 11 p.m. on a Saturday. We thought they were drunk and maybe tried the wrong one. My girlfriend didn't see his face when she went through the peephole. We went to bed and I grabbed a hammer before we did. 2 minutes after the lights went out in our room, someone opened our front door. I jumped out of the bed with hammer in hand and charged at the door. My girlfriend says she's never heard my voice sound so scary. I was hoarse the next day. It was wild. She barricaded herself and our dog in the bedroom and called 911 while I charged the door and body slammed it before they could get the whole way in. I felt him get pushed out. He must have thought my girlfriend was alone. Who knows how long he'd been watching us/her. It's unsettling to have never found out who it was. A week later, we went back to try and get back to a routine, and at 10 p.m. someone threw something at our bedroom window. Cops are useless, and we moved out and broke our lease a week later. This dude tried to walk in 2 minutes after the light went out? Also, surely you didn't go to bed without locking the door, right? Because what do you mean he just opened it? You didn't say this guy broke in. You just said he opened the door. Anyway, if there's ever a reason to break your lease, this is a pretty good one. Story 52. Wife and I were watching TV when all of a sudden our doorknob starts jiggling. There had been some suspicious activity in the area recently, so we were on high alert. Wife got on the phone with the 911 and I grabbed my pistol and was aiming at the door. All of a sudden it opens and a head peeks in. I start screaming I'm about to shoot if they come any further. Then I realize it was our friends. They had misunderstood us and thought we asked them to come over for drinks and they know the code to our door. We thought they were coming over the next day. We drank a lot that night. Could have ended way worse. Story 53. Really don't know if this counts, but when I was a young teen, I was home alone one afternoon, and so all the doors were locked as they always were when I was home alone. This scruffy adult man's face popped up in the window in front of me while I was washing dishes, and he demanded I open my back door. The kitchen window looked out into our backyard, our fenced-in backyard, so he hopped the 5-foot fence. I shook my head and he put a gun that he'd been holding to his own head and threatened to pull the trigger if I didn't let him in. I laughed and told him to go ahead. He threatened some more and got frustrated and left. What an idiot. Story 54. I was in bed and heard something outside. I have a lot of vivid dreams, so I ignored it at first, but he started using a screwdriver to get the window open. My bed was right next to the window. After realizing that this was really happening, remember I woke up to this. I got up quietly and found my phone. I'm a small woman, so I didn't want him to see me. It was still dark and the blinds were down, so I turned the torchlight on and stood against the wall opposite to the window, aiming the light directly at him. I held it up high so I would look taller. I figured all he would see was the torchlight as soon as he got in. Sure enough, he got the window open, pushed the fly screen out, lifted the blind to start climbing in. As soon as his head was through, I started shaking my phone so that he could not only see the light but that someone was holding it. I was also banging on the wall and making the lowest, most guttural noise I could muster like a freaking ape. I don't know what came over me. I just knew he couldn't see me and I had to overwhelm his senses so he wouldn't notice my size and gender. And it worked. He let out an ungodly scream and ran. I think my behavior startled him. He left a bag behind and it had a needle in it. I ran to my neighbor's house and called the police. They came and fingerprinted the place, took his bag and left. End of story. Didn't come back or anything. Story 55. I was home but in a different room. I was also like 7, so don't really remember much besides the police showing up. My dad woke up to somebody going through his nightstand drawer and ended up shooting him in the butt. This was in a gated community, and it turned out to be a neighbor's family member with a severe drug addiction. Nothing came of it, and the intruder was not seriously injured. If I remember correctly, the family said he had gotten his crap together after he served his jail sentence, and it was a wake-up call about how severe his addiction was. Yeah, I can't really think of a better wake-up call. Literally getting shot in the butt. That would do it. Seriously, though, I'm glad he's gotten clean. It's absolutely not an easy thing to do. But when it gets this bad, it is good to try to do something about the addiction at least. Story 56. Was about 12 when it happened. My friend was staying over. After my mom left for work, they bombarded the bell. Didn't open it because I didn't feel like it. Broke into a window by my bathroom. Saw them as I was going for a pee. Luckily, ran upstairs. To apartment house. I lived downstairs, parents upstairs. Closed the door that locked up the stairway with my friend. Grabbed a big butcher's knife and waited atop the stairs. Glass around stairs so they could see me and I could see them. Called police, but when they saw us with the knife, they ran out the way they came. In the end, nothing stolen. No one hurt, just a broken window. Story 57. I lived in a studio apartment at the time. Came home from the bars to a random dude rifling through my stuff. Invited him to leave through the door. Instead, he decided to punch me in the face. Needless to say, this made me upset. I proceeded to throw him around my apartment like a beach ball. After breaking most of my furniture and throwing him through the wall of my bathroom, I picked him up and chucked him out the window head first. He got lucky and landed on his feet, shattering both of his legs. I lived on the 3rd story. Cops got called by my neighbors while this was happening. I got charged with the defenestration. I pled the castle defense and got the charges dropped. He is still in a wheelchair. Side note, this event led me to getting sober. I'm now 6 years clean and 3 years sober. I don't need the level of anger in my life that I used to have pretty consistently. Story 58. When I was really young, I accidentally got left at the house by myself. All the family had gone on holiday and for some reason, forgot one of their sons wasn't with them. Anyway, I made the best of it. But one night I overheard these 2 guys outside saying that they were going to come back and burgle the house. I was really scared, but I decided I had to protect the house. I prepared a load of elaborate traps that really hurt the guys once they did eventually get in. It distracted them long enough for the police to arrive and arrest them. It was really stressful at the time, but I can look back on it and laugh now. OP, Does your name happen to be Macaulay Culkin? Just asking for a friend. Story 59. In my case, I'm kind of the neighborhood mom. I have my own kids, and I have a nice backyard with a swimming pool, and I always have the good snacks. I live in a neighborhood that has mixed social classes, with some folks who are upper middle class a few streets up from me, and some folks in Section 8 a few streets down. I make up the border of in between. I would say we're lower middle class. Not the poorest of the poor, and we can cover a few minor car or appliance repairs when needed, but we'd probably be screwed if a big cash requiring emergency happened. Sometimes the poor neighborhood kids come over to swim in our Walmart pop-up pool. Sometimes they knock on our door and ask for snacks. Sometimes I notice their shoes are too small or falling apart and I pick up a pair of shoes that might fit them better. One day a few years ago during the height of the George Floyd protests, 3 boys, 6, 8, and 15, started coming to my door every morning for breakfast. They'd play with my kids all day, eating lunch and dinner, playing in the pool, watching cartoons, and just hanging out. Then, at night, they would begrudgingly leave. They never answered any questions about their parents, and their parents never seemed to look for them or wonder where they were. They were always wearing the same clothes and swam in their underwear. And honestly, they smelled pretty awful. I bought them some new clothes and some soap and shampoo suitable for their hair and skin, and sent them up to shower and change one day. They then told me their dad was an alcoholic and beat them and threw them out. I let them spend the night, and the next day I called a social worker friend of mine and we took them to a local youth shelter. Their dad pitched a fit, and they were forced to come home, but they were then immediately thrown out again. They came back to my house and I let them sleep here again. They then started sneaking over every night and their dad threw them out. One day they ran to my house and banged on my door. I threw it open, and I was met with 3 bloodied kids. The 15-year-old had a head injury and a black eye and 2 broken fingers. One of the younger boys had a huge cut on his cheek and a bruise on his side, and the other had bruises all up and down his back. I brought them inside and locked the door. We called the police. They took 5.5 hours to respond. I sent the boys upstairs to the bathroom with my kids and told them to hide. I called my friends. For 5.5 hours, the boy's drunken, armed father tried to kick in my solid oak door. He screamed at my neighbors, calling me a creep. Thankfully, no one believed him. And eventually, he split the door just as the police showed up. I stood there in my living room watching the door, while my friends stood outside waiting and watching to make sure things were safe. I prayed to my grandmother's gods that I wouldn't have to use my staff, and prepared myself to try and calmly talk him down, but to do whatever I had to do to keep him from getting at the kids. He did manage to break my door, but the deadbolt and the latch lock thing held, so he didn't make it all the way inside. The police didn't arrest him, though. Story 60. I was home in bed in our 2-story house with my wife at the time and my 11-year-old son. It was about 5 a.m. when the house alarm went off. I went into my son's room, realized he was still in bed, and pulled him into our bedroom. I could hear someone downstairs breaking things and tearing the house up. I'm former military. I grabbed my shotgun and took a shooting stance, aiming down the upstairs hallway, loudly racking the shotgun as my wife called 911. The whole time I was yelling, "We are armed. Set foot on the stairs and I'll shoot you." It took the police about 2 minutes to arrive. Though the attackers had fled, they were quickly caught. All 3 were armed with pistols and had duct tape and box cutters on them. Turns out these 3 had been on a crime spree, breaking into 2 other unoccupied houses that night and committing an armed robbery in broad daylight earlier that afternoon. I've since upgraded to an AR-15. Not a day will go by when I'm not armed. Look, I gotta say, these guys really pushed their luck. They already burgled multiple times successfully that night. Like, no one was home and they got out with stuff, supposedly. And they just had to go for that one more house. And OP was more than ready. Story 61. Only an attempt. Moving into an off-campus college apartment. Spent hours moving stuff in with lots of people. Everybody left to shower and grab beers and burgers now that the job was done. I, however, took a quick cool shower and nap. I guess someone saw it all and thought everyone left. Easy score since everything was all boxed up. I woke up to breaking glass and a hand inside trying to undo the window lock. I knocked something over turning on the light, but the hand kept trying to get the lock. My dog with an aggressive bark was going nuts, but the hand kept trying. I said nothing, but grabbed my shotgun, racking around a few feet from the window in a covered position aimed at the window. Never saw someone withdraw a hand and run so fast. Called the cops. Report taken, but nothing came of it. 2 hours later with a new pane of glass and putty and it was all fixed. Story 62. My roommate's ex's boyfriend, drugged out of his brain, kicked in our front door and hit me in the face with a concrete tamper. Think a giant potato masher. I'm a pacifist, so I subdued him by bear mauling him until he was on the ground and able for my roommate to lay on him. I called the cops. My roommate wanted me to kick or hit or dismantle him in some way, and I couldn't because I loathe the violence. so he got up to get his and the guy got away. I called the cops. They came and took our statements, ID, etc., and so on. And when they came back in, saying, "Mr. OP, you're gonna have to come with us," my face streaming blood and dazed, lifting me out of my seat to get handcuffed, it was a weird moment. Seemed I had a warrant for a Dodge ticket or something, I don't remember. But I'd only been sober about 3 months, so I figured stuff like this was going to start happening. Just sucked that I was now 2 runs behind on calling the cops, as the guy who cut me up was gone, not under pursuit, and I was going to jail. In intake, they all assumed I was a resisting arrest book because I was sitting there bleeding, cuts on my face and the bridge of my nose. Common injuries for the situation. When I told my story, I got way better treatment. Everyone was like, "Damn, this is a great example of why people are afraid to call us." All in all, not my worst incarceration, and not my best evening of hanging out in my living room. Story 63. I guess this counts. I came home to a random woman in my bedroom. She had drawn herself a bath in the ensuite and used an assortment of items from my shower shelf. And when I called out, "Hello?" she came around the corner wearing my clothes. I found out later she had tried on a spare set of glasses and some other dresses of mine too. It was freaking terrifying. I still get a cold pit in my stomach thinking about it. As for what I did, well, I was just out with my mom, who was luckily stopping in to use the bathroom before leaving. I was an adult moved out with my partner, so I did the reasonable adult thing and let my mommy handle it for me while I hyperventilated and tried not to lose my crap. Story 64. 29-year-old lad entered the house and went to dad's room. Found 70-year-old dad alone, pistol whipped him and had a scuffle. Dad managed to force him out of his room, locked door, got gun from safe, fired warning shot. Guy ran off and murdered somebody same day. Still don't know how dad managed to overpower him at his age. He contemplated going out and shooting him, but thought it was better not to. A gun saved his life, basically, and yes, country has gun laws and restrictions. Must be kept in a safe, no carrying, no automatic rifles allowed, must have licenses. Story 65. We were growing and selling weed, nothing major. 2 tents, 4 plants, but someone, we have our suspicions on who, told some bad guys. 2 guys gained access to the building somehow and knocked it directly on the door of our flat. My mate opened it, they punched him in the face, came inside, pointed a gun at his sister who was there at the time, and cleaned us out of our bud in cash. 4K in cash, 50 to 60 Z in jars, maybe 5 Z in bags. They were calm and as reasonable as you could expect. Said something along the lines of, "Don't be stupid and we won't shoot you." Worth noting that guns are extremely rare where I live. First and last time I've ever seen a live one. Didn't seem like crackheads, but pros. Could have been worse. No one was seriously hurt. Didn't take any of the growing equipment or plants either. Just the cash and weed. I was sitting at the living room table the whole time, never moved a muscle. Whole thing took like 5 minutes and they left. Even though as I describe it, it doesn't sound that bad, it was truly terrifying and fairly traumatic. I know my friend was seriously shaken up by his sister being the one with a gun pointed at her. Moved out of that building a few weeks later, and I haven't grown or sold since. Pretty sure we know who they were, but not worth any more hassle. Just took it as the end of the road. In retrospect, better than it ending with us going to prison. Story 66. When I was 9, I was down the street at my best friend's house. Her mom was sick, blackout drunk, in bed, completely non-responsive. Before she went to bed, she had told us to make sure that we didn't answer the door under any circumstances. Easy. Can do. We went upstairs to play Barbies or whatever. About 2 hours later, there's a knock at the door, and then another, and then louder knocking, and then it stops. We go back to playing, until the back door opens and there are footsteps in the living room. She tells me her dad won't get off work until late that night. It can't be him. Her mom is passed out in bed. What do we do? My friend is really freaking out at this point. We were 2 9-year-old girls. She whispers, "My dad has a Glock in the closet." Bingo. To be fair, I had parents that took me to the gun range for about a year at that point, and I did riflery at camp every summer. But obviously, this was dumb. We found the gun, loaded it, and crept downstairs to defend ourselves against the home invader. At this point, you might be wondering, could they have called the police? Yes. We were lost in the sauce, caught up in the moment. It happened really fast. I turned the corner with the gun, feeling like one of Charlie's Angels, ready to shoot the invader and literally end someone if they came for me, only to find her grandmother making a sandwich. Her grandmother was planning on coming over, but in my friend's mom's drunken state, she had completely forgotten. I guess not a real home invasion, but 9-year-old me was ready to shoot, so I would say it's close. I can't imagine what a terrifying shock that must have been for Grandma, because I guarantee she wasn't expecting people in there either. Or at least, not people like that. I'm also just trying to put myself in the shoes of if I were robbing a house, and a 9-year-old swung the corner with a Glock pointed at me, what would I even think? It would just be like, so this is it, huh? A 9-year-old, that's what does me in? Alright, fair enough. Anyway, that's the last story for today. For now, thank you so much for watching. I hope you have a wonderful day or night wherever you are, and I will see you in the next one.